Morning, everybody. We're going to be talking about California energy policy and China, right? I'll tell you straight up, the article that we're dealing with this morning is talking about the fuel disaster, uh, prices in California just skyrocketing because of California government policies. The China angle is something I'm bringing in quite separately because I think it's important. We have not had nearly enough discussion in this country over the real threat that China poses us. You can never underestimate how very dangerous China is. And I just realized that Mario isn't in here yet because I didn't drop him the link yet. So let me see if I can fix that nonsense, and hopefully he'll be joining us shortly. Here, I thought I was starting the show without Mario because he's an asshole and overslept or something. But nope. This time, it was at least partially my fault. But Mario, if you're watching, bitch, you could have asked. Okay, so we're going to start with this article from Zero Hedge. California faces fuel disaster as refineries and gas stations shut down. The Democrat crusade to divert blame for the stagflation crisis triggered during the Biden administration led them down a path of economic lies. Okay, now, in fairness, we're going to have to back up just a little bit. Yes, there were a lot of problems during the Biden administration. Yes, Biden absolutely shut down American oil production, energy production, and shunted a great deal of American private and taxpayer-funded investment in the energy sector over to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and investment in foreign oil production, most especially in Germany and, oh shit, Russia. That's right. Your gas is expensive right now because Joe Biden personally and intentionally funded Russia in order to facilitate the invasion of Ukraine. Because we needed another forever war. You know, they were planning when they made these policy moves, they were planning on drawing down in Afghanistan and leaving behind billions of dollars worth of American military equipment to arm the Taliban intentionally with malice aforethought, and knowing that they would need another forever war to hold up the new industrial, the military industrial state, right? So the military industrial complex, rather, which may as well be considered the military industrial state. Now, that said, a lot of the foundation for the rapid collapse of California's energy structure started back in like 2013 under, I believe then it was then Governor Jerry Brown, I think it was. We're going to talk about that in a little more detail as we go forward this morning. But what we're looking at right now is California is facing basically infrastructure energy collapse. Oil refineries are shutting down because of massive onerous implications from California public policy. The profit margins in many of these industries were paper thin as their manufacturing and labor costs skyrocketed, yet Democrats tried to scapegoat them away. The word accountability is not in the leftist vocabulary. We're only now starting to witness the aftermath of the legislation and policies put into place by blue states as a means to control prices. California, under Governor Newsom, may have staged its own economic demise, the final nail in the coffin, after laws were passed requiring even greater state interference into oil refineries and gas stations. One of the big tricks that's happening there is they're putting in new requirements on fuel storage, where gas stations are being required to replace their existing fuel tanks with theoretically more robust, double-lined, extra duty, super strong special fuel tanks. Let me run you guys back to the East Palestine train wreck, right? Just for a moment, for a little context here. if y'all remember, that happened, and there was a major problem with the chemicals that were spilled in that train derailment, right? And like the majority of Americans, it was huge on social media. People saying, "Oh, wait, wow, a train derailment. Wow, I've never heard of that. That never happens." Turns out, yeah, it happens. It actually happens more than you might imagine. Trains just flop the fuck over. Uh, and not all the time, but it's not something. It's not an unheard of incident, right? Now, unlike that, bring this around. Have you seen a lot of stories about gas stations just spontaneously exploding? Nope. Nope. That is not a big problem that we have. Okay. Now, on the other side of that argument, one might say, well, a lower quality fuel storage system, a fuel tank at a gas station might develop leaks, and that's a big environmental concern. Yeah, that's an environmental concern that's going to get addressed immediately. I promise you. When you're running on thin margins and suddenly you're selling less gas than you're buying, you're going to get to the bottom of that real quick. In fact, and I can't state this for a certainty, because I've never written an insurance policy on gas stations in particular, but I've written a lot of business insurance policies on different kinds of business, and I can tell you one of the things that is often covered. In fact, I would say you'd be a fool to buy business insurance that did not cover the equipment, right? So again, I cannot say for a certainty that in the case of gas stations, this is how it works, but I suspect that the gas stations' fuel tanks, the underground fuel tanks, have some kind of insurance coverage on them. And yeah, if I'm buying 1,000 gallons of gasoline and only selling 999, I want to know where my extra $4 went, right? Or $2.50 or whatever, right? And if it's a leak that matters, it's going to be more than one of those gallons. If suddenly I'm selling 10% less gas than I bought, then I'm going to need to know where my money's disappearing to, and we're going to check it, and we're going to, now we're going to undergo the cost of fixing that problem, right? But if a government regulatory body comes in and says, hey, you, for no reason other than we just want you to, are now required by law, under threat of penalty and pain of death, because all law is only law if it is under threat of penalty and pain of death. You will now, at your own expense, purchase an unnecessarily over-rendered, overwrought piece of equipment that you frankly don't need. We know you don't need it, but we've made some deals. Now, here's where China comes in. What you have to understand about these California refineries is they do not just refine crude into usable fuel. No. These refineries are also producing things like jet fuel, right? Jet fuel and diesel that's being used by military interests. So what you have to understand here is this is not just a situation where we get to point and laugh at California and say, "Ha, dumb hippies! Now your stupid hippie bohemian lifestyle is more expensive because your stupid hippie policies are stupid and hippie." No. Now we have to acknowledge that California, through its government policies, has created a massive national security risk by altering the logistics and the pipeline of national security related fuel interests, jet fuels, diesel fuel that's used for military vessels, military aircraft, and the like. And that we cannot say that without asking the question, California, and asking the questions about California and China having a long and very tight relationship with one another. Okay, so California-China oversight question. California has formal cooperation agreements and trade infrastructure aimed at China, plus documented PRC influence operations and federal agent cases in California politics. Okay, let me drop the camera down. Energy policy is now a national security input, not just an economic issue. California's China ties require oversight, money trails, lobbying, NGOs, and institutional partnerships. This is not paranoia, guys. This is straight up hygiene. Basically, what I'm about to do for you is I'm going to lay out the case that if California is causing us a major national security problem because of their psychotic communist energy policies, then we should definitely be asking ourselves some questions. More importantly, we should be asking Gavin Newsom and California some questions about how much influence China has had on those energy policies. Let's not forget, one of the reasons, in fact, the primary reason that Donald Trump pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accords is that they were extremely one-sided against the United States. And they were one-sided because at the time, and still today, even since we left Paris Climate Accords, the U.S. has actually cleaned up its pollution, improved its carbon footprint, and American businesses are running greener and cleaner. In some places because of ludicrous government oversight, but in many places because they're finding more efficient, cheaper, cleaner ways to do business. Waste is money, right? The less waste a business has, the better its profit, its bottom line. Capitalism cleans stuff up. Whereas the other two, the two largest contributors to global pollution, being China and India, were essentially not required to do anything to clean up. And even in the little places where they did agree to improve their pollution situation, their output, etc., there was no enforcement mechanism at all. And we were expected as Americans to foot the bill for billions of dollars of clean energy subsidies and contributions that were going to these countries who all, by the way, have a long established track record of money laundering, basically stealing American money and putting it in their own pockets, right? Patrick says the U.S. has done more for reducing its carbon emissions than any other country in the Accord, but the U.S. was the most penalized. That is correct. Companies without oversight in the past have disposed of the chemicals if it's been cheaper. DuPont, for example, that's true. That's true. I'm not saying no oversight. Unless we get my dream world would be an actual. I'm what you might call an optimistic I almost said arsonist. I'm what you might call an optimistic anarchist, right? My dream utopia has zero government, but I'm a realist on this point. That's not an option, right? If there's not a government, people like me who are willing to pull a trigger will be the government as soon as you say as soon as it's the case that there is no other government. So, California state level connections to China, formal MOUs, memorandums of understanding, and cooperation agreements with PRC linked entities and provinces. Governor level engagement, including meetings with CCP leadership. That's Jerry Brown and Gavin Newsom, by the way. California-China Office of Trade and Investment established in Shanghai. So there's the Bay Area. We'll get to that one in a minute. The Bay Area coalition or something. But the California China Office of Trade and Investment, established in Shanghai, the CCOTOS, its public facing website says that it facilitates businesses who are wanting to expand into and operate in China. There's a counter organization, the Bay Area thing that we'll get to in a minute. I think I must have put that in the slides. It's state-backed trade and investment facilitation infrastructure. It facilitates California businesses entering into China, provides concierge services, introductions, and corporate setup assistance, operates within China's legal and regulatory environment, and part of the facilitation services that it advertises on its website is facilitating legal compliance, right? Large businesses, hell, small businesses in America have a massive amount of regulatory compliance that they have to deal with just to do business in the United States. This is true in all developed nations, especially, right? The more communist a government is, the more of this regulation they have, because for so many reasons. One, I mean, obviously the authority, the control, et cetera. But another thing that is dramatically under-discussed is when you have a massive communist government, it is incumbent upon the government to create work. So, they're going to make as much regulatory trash, clutter as possible to create bullshit little make-work jobs where they could pay somebody, barely a living standard, and then they get to have positive jobs reports. We created X number of jobs. Yeah, but 90% of those jobs are 4 people doing a thing that should only employ 1 person. Also, within China, the rules say that every business, and it's couched as every business that has 3 or more Chinese Communist Party members now has to comply. But if you've got 3 or more Chinese Communist Party members, then you have to have, in your company, working in your business, then you have to have a secretary, an officer. You have to have an office of the Chinese Communist Party in your business as part of your business, right? So for this organization, the CCTOS, to say that they facilitate a business's entry into China, and because the people who go into that office are necessarily Chinese Communist Party members, the existence of the office creates the requirement for the office. So the office is placed. So this is funny. They try to hide it in colorful and polite language, terms like concierge services, introductions, and corporate setup assistance. But basically, if you're a large enough American business that you're expanding your business operations to China, especially if you're going through the California China Trade Office and having your facilitation done there, that means that what the CCTOS does, at least in part, is it places Chinese Communist Party members into positions of access and authority in American businesses. Okay? Chinese party organization requirements. See, Chinese law requires the establishment of CC party organizations when the conditions are met. The trigger is CCP membership, not Chinese citizenship. And in fairness, not all Chinese citizens are members of the CCP. That is a particular position, a particular membership. Not just automatically you're Chinese, you're CCP. But as I believe we'll get into a little later in the slideshow, one thing that the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, relies on is the very strict taboo of Americans against racial profiling, against making assumptions based on ethnicity. right? We'll get into that a little bit more in a minute here. But that is absolutely something that they abuse in order to sidestep our security measures and infiltrate and conduct espionage operations against the United States. And those operations can be politically kinetic, like influencing policy decisions that are beneficial to the Chinese Communist Party. So it is, I'm not saying that it is guaranteed the case that what has happened is Gavin Newsom has been totally compromised by the Chinese Communist Party and is intentionally creating bad policy in order to create precisely the national security threat over which we should be concerned, given that the dissolution through policy and economic abuse of American refineries in China is the same as China directly causing that to happen. But I am saying that the information I've put together here and that we're discussing this morning is beyond sufficient probable cause to investigate precisely that relationship. Because quite frankly, if you assume that that bad political outcomes are the result of incompetence, then you are presupposing that unintelligent, incompetent people are attaining high office. I don't find that to be credible. I don't think that stupid people frequently get elected to high office. Either their elections are totally compromised, and so the people are not choosing them based on any kind of qualification, etc. Right? That's a possibility, but that level of compromise and corruption requires competence and intelligence. Right? So there's an option. Or they are effectively appealing to people, right? Even if they're totally evil and corrupt, like Gavin Newsom is. And no, I'm not giving him the benefit of the doubt on that. He is evil and corrupt. That is obvious. But he is intelligent and competent and able to manipulate people and attain high office. But that level of intelligence removes a lot of the charitable presupposition of incompetence explaining away the destruction of his own energy economy. Especially when this is right out of the playbook of the Chinese Communist Party. We've seen it happen in other places, right? And now we see, to not presuppose that that an obvious attack on American national security infrastructure, like energy production, specifically in this case, we're talking about jet fuel and diesel fuel for military equipment. To look at that, see that it is happening, right? It is something that the Chinese have attempted and even accomplished in the past. And then jump to the conclusion that the two facts are unrelated. Right? You might as well come in and find the toddler covered in chocolate icing and assume that it wasn't the toddler that ate the cake. Right? Some evidence is just too coincidental to be ignored. And when the bad outcomes of a policy, when the negative outcomes of a policy are extremely favorable to the stated end goals of the person who is responsible, then it becomes uncredible to presuppose incompetence over malice. It's not intelligent to make that jump. Why it matters. Foreign businesses entering China operate inside CCP governance structures. State-facilitated entry creates indirect exposure to party state systems. This is a transparency and risk management issue, right? Energy sector, refinery shutdowns, major California refineries shutting down or winding down operations. Loss of in-state refining capacity for gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. Predictable supply tightening acknowledged in advance. The current prediction is that gas will be between $5 and $6 a gallon in California, beginning in January or February, and I think that's optimistic. In 2008, I was doing a PCS Diddy, a permanent change of station Diddy move, do-it-yourself move, where I packed up my pick-em-up truck to drive from Monterey, California to the far east side of Texas. It's a long damn drive. And as I was coming over the mountains, leaving California, I was almost out of gas going up the mountain, and I stopped, right? Remember, this is 2008. I stopped at a gas station on the top of the mountain range, and gas there was $10.50 a gallon. So for $20, I got a gallon of gas, a cheeseburger, a cup of coffee, and a pack of cigarettes. I got back in my pick-em-up truck with the standard manual transmission, right? I spent enough gas to get out of the parking lot onto the road, and then I kicked in the Mexican overdrive to get down the mountain out of California. And the first gas station I came to after crossing the state line had gas for $1, like $1.58 or something, like ridiculously low by comparison to what I had been paying in California in the preceding 2 years. So California, like I would not be surprised to see gas hit $10 a gallon next year in California. Not just because of the market pressure created by this disastrous failure of policy, but because California, well, I mean, it's a communist state, right? And there is nothing so true of a communist as they revel in harming their people. So the import dependency. The California fuel market is geographically isolated, which means that replacement fuel will arrive by ship, which does mean China. Import timelines, weeks, not days. Higher prices and reduced resilience during disruption. When there is, remember at the end of the 70s, over fuel shortages, we had policy where I think the way it worked was if the last digit of your license plate, if the last digit of your license plate was an even number, you filled up on one day. You filled up on like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and if it was an odd number, you could only fill up on Tuesday and Thursday. You're going to see shit like that. You're going to see runs on gas stations when there's an expectation that prices are about to go up a bit. Like, there'll be a headline that says, "Hey, we expect fuel prices to go up by 50 cents a gallon tomorrow. California will run out of gas," and then it won't be, "Well, we're out of gas for the next day or two." It'll be like if you guys remember after the hurricane last year, right? After Helene went through, there were gas stations around me out here in the country that didn't have fuel for 2 or 3 weeks. Some of the smaller mom and pop gas stations couldn't get any gas in the pump, in the tank for weeks. And when they did, it was gone as soon as it got there. Right? Somebody would see the fuel tanker pull up to the gas station and start filling up the tank at the gas station, and they'd pull in and they'd call their cousins, and before you know it, the place would be just packed. Be assholes to elbows, butts to nuts, and no gas left on the flip-flop. So foreign exposure. Increased reliance on overseas refined fuel. This is Biden's fault, and assuming, if you assume that Biden had an intelligent thought while he was in office, more likely just the Democrat Party and their Chinese masters. So imports tracked from Asia suppliers, including China, longer supply chains. Energy security intersects directly with national defense readiness, and we already talked about this. This energy security question. These refineries are not just making MoGas, motor gas, gasoline for your cars. They're producing strategic value diesel and jet fuel. Major impact. So the national security implications, military installations rely on steady fuel supply, and so this energy fragility becomes a strategic liability. That sentence right there, this energy fragility becomes a strategic liability. That alone, that fact by itself, right, without any of the evidence tying China and California together and creating the very reasonable suspicion backed by what I believe I've just laid out to be absolute probable cause. Forget all that for just a second. The mere fact that this level of energy fragility becomes a strategic liability to national security is, in my opinion, right? And this is not just the opinion of some old dude complaining about shit on the internet. This is former U.S. Army intelligence operations guy, right? Intel analytics strategy, understanding how the game theory of the world affects the way that important actors make decisions so that we can create packets of actionable intelligence and conduct kinetic strikes on hostile foreign actors. Right? I've got some chest candy to that effect. So when I say the fact that the energy fragility becomes a strategic liability is reason enough to investigate whether or not there is foreign influence, foreign adversarial influence involved in creating that vulnerability. Because I can tell you this, China does not make moves for the mere purpose of improving China's economic standing. China does not make business decisions. It makes military decisions. Sometimes military decisions look like business decisions. But as I pointed out earlier, there is a CCP party member, a CCP secretariat officer, right? Essentially a little private commissar for all of the large businesses in China. That means that if you have a business in China, you are de facto a part of the Chinese Communist government. Even if you are headquartered and founded in the United States of America, once you are operating fully in China, you're not a Chinese company. You are a Chinese government entity. And even if you don't set out with malicious intent to create that relationship, you are influenced by an American adversary who is constantly engaged in effective and very dangerous espionage activity, including culturally and economically kinetic espionage activity. That's just the facts on the ground, right? So oversight and investigation priorities, we need to be looking at money trails, investments, donations, financial incentives, lobbying and regulatory influence. Yes, the Chinese. Okay, I've talked, and Mario has too. We've talked about Israel a bit on this channel. And it's true. Israel gets a lot of money from the U.S. that we should not be sending to them, right? This isn't the Jews thing, right? This isn't the JQ nonsense. This is legitimate concern over a foreign entity, Israel, getting too much of our special money, right? And more importantly, that they have undue influence on our foreign policy decisions, right? But we are not a JQ channel. And I'll point this out before I get into the next thing that I'm going to say about China, because there are a lot of guys out there that are obsessed with the Israel question. And the way I like to say it, they can't see the forest for the Jews. They think that the Jewish state, that Israel is like the one world overarching conspiracy machine that is responsible for all the world's ills. There are problems there that do need to be addressed. And among those are foreign influence on our foreign policy decisions and the expenditure of our tax dollars. We send way more money to China, and China spends way more money on lobbying and foreign influence campaigns. So Luke Walker just watched the Letter of Mark video, and we made a joke about how black people can't swim, brother. I mean, by the numbers, prove me wrong. Jokes are jokes, baby. So, I hope you, if you can't laugh, then what are you even here for, Luke? Good luck. So, where was I? So China is a bigger problem, right? The nut jobs that are all wound up around the bend about Israel. Like I say, they can't see the forest for the Jews. We have other problems, bigger problems. China. Okay? You need to understand the Chinese Communist Party is currently operating illegal police stations in this country whose job it is to conduct command and control over the Chinese diaspora who are located in the United States. Now, why this is a major problem? China, and especially the Chinese government, is dramatically more ethnically homogenous than the United States. So when you're talking about U.S. government entities, agencies, or even just U.S. companies in the U.S., there are people who are of Chinese descent, third, fourth, fifth generation even, who are, perfectly welcome to pursue employment. One of my favorite soldiers, one of my good buds when I was still active duty, Chiching Z, great guy, funny, and I worked with him a lot, and he worked with me in intelligence, right, at a level of trust, at a level of high trust. And it's been years since I spoke to Z, and I bet you, I guarantee you, if he called me and needed to hide a body, I'd say, yeah, man, I'm there. It's a long drive, and I might have to blow the tires all the way up. But the fact is that in America, getting people who are of Chinese descent into positions of high trust is dramatically easier than getting people who are not of Chinese descent into positions of high trust within the CCP. This is a major advantage that the Chinese have in the conduct of espionage and kinetic operations, right? And a major vulnerability for our operations in espionage and intelligence operations against the Chinese. It's very hard to place an American agent into China who is not of Chinese descent because of the ethnic homogeneity of their government structures, which also means that it is dramatically easier for China to insert a Chinese agent into the pipeline to acquire one of those high trust positions in U.S. operations so that they can be deployed as our espionage agent against the CCP, while all the while having been working for the CCP. And they're operating unlicensed illegal police departments in the U.S. to control the Chinese diaspora. The fact is, they're not in total control of every Chinese person, every person of Chinese descent in the United States, right? That would be ludicrous. It would be impossible to achieve. However, the takeaway is that if a person is of Chinese descent, you might hire him to be a fry cook without any more scrutiny than you would give a black guy or a white guy whose mommy and daddy both spoke hillbilly. But being of Chinese descent should absolutely trigger vetting and investigation, additional vetting and investigation beyond what other Americans of any stripe almost might go through, because the probability, it doesn't even have to be high. The probability is non-zero that if you are Chinese and trying to enter a position of high trust in the U.S. government, that you are a Chinese intelligence operation. Notice I didn't say agent. I said operation, because this is something the Russians have done it too. The Chinese are more effective at it. They've done it a lot more. We're talking about a government that has existed for a very long time, right? When we talk about the Germans and the Nazis, people talk about how evil the Nazis were, and some of us who are a little more intelligent, a little more well-read on history, will also point out, well, the Soviet Union and Mao's Chinese Communist Party killed a lot more people than the Nazis did, right? And that's important. That's worth understanding. But here's something that's more important to understand. The Soviet Union collapsed. It's gone. The Nazis are all living on the dark side of the moon, right? They evacuated and went to clone dinosaurs and build T-Rex mechs on the dark side of the moon in 1943, right? They are no longer a problem here. But the Chinese Communist Party, that's a reference to a film called Iron Sky, where the Nazis, it's a sci-fi comedy film where the Nazis went to the dark side of the moon. Definitely worth a watch. Fucking hilarious. But the Chinese Communist Party of current today is the same Chinese Communist Party that existed when the Nazis were a problem. Okay? Everybody likes to say that Hitler was the most evil man who ever lived because of the concentration camps and all that. Y'all, Hitler was a blip in the scale of evil men murdering people, making bodies fields of dead. Hitler was barely a competent novice. Right? 6 million, 7 million? No. Those are rookie numbers. China? Russia? They can show you how it's done. And China is still operating under the same government since before World War II. That's why history matters. Pitt Danny says we should be checking. Yeah, and that in fairness, that is something we do, checking how many family members they have in China that can be held hostage. But while that is something that we do, the Chinese government and the Chinese espionage structure, they understand that that is something that we do. And we're talking about a government that they're more than happy to either destroy the records that tie. This is part of why I said earlier I used the word operation instead of agent. They will destroy the records that tie that person, that tie that agent back to anybody in China. They'll falsify records to create the illusion that their family has been here for years, for decades, right? They'll falsify records and make it look like the grandfather immigrated and you're, second or third generation American born. Or they'll just straight up immigrate somebody here. And the operation is, hey, Almighty, you're going to go live in America and you're going to have children and their grandchildren are going to be Chinese spies. So you're going to be training them for that. We're not talking about hundreds. We're talking about dozens. But, enough to have some redundancy without creating the kind of pattern that's easily tracked. And that is not conspiracy theory shit, guys. That is stuff that, frankly, we just have to, that is a reality that we have to train for, study, and prepare for as intelligence operators in the U.S. Army, Navy, Marine Corps, etc. Not the Air Force. They mostly just eat Pop-Tarts. But the Army, the Navy, and the Marine Corps, for sure. Right? And the Space Corps, of course, the Space Force, of course, is mostly just concerned with moon Nazi T-Rex mechs. I'm going to have to go watch that movie again today. It's hilarious. Full disclaimer. The mechanized Tyrannosaurus Rex, the Nazi T-Rex mechs, don't appear until the second film. So you got to watch both of them. But start with Iron Sky. It's hilarious. So let me see. And that was the last slide. I think I covered enough of the article. Yeah. I think I can go ahead and wrap up there. And I hope you guys enjoyed the show this morning. I know this was a little heavy. If you haven't had a chance yet, as a Christmas gift to the audience, normally on Saturdays we do the deep dive, and it's behind the paywall for our Rumble Premium members only. But on this past Saturday, we did the story of Jesus, a lot of scripture, a lot of direct biblical reading, and I think we had a pretty solid show. And so as our Christmas gift, we left that one open on all the usual platforms and didn't go behind the paywall with it. So y'all can go check that out on Rumble or YouTube. If you're not already, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and this is the one that's really helpful. Comments and chats are great, but share the show. And right now, frankly, I'd prefer you share the YouTube link for the next couple of weeks. So I'm trying to break that next milestone on YouTube, right? I need just about 15 or 16 subscribers on YouTube to break my next milestone. And I think that'll make a big difference in our growth trajectory over there. We've been growing great on Rumble. We've kind of stalled out and plateaued on YouTube because we've gotten a little less polite on trying to play ball with the algorithm. And so, yeah, that's kind of where we're at there. Now, before I wrap up today, let me go and find you some, let me go and find us somebody, because I still have to do a couple of, I still have to do a couple of Rumble raids. And I'd rather do one. Let's try the Lee Elric show. Let's see if he's any good. We'll check him out. I'm not familiar with him. I'll hang out with you guys and watch his show with you for a minute. But I'm going to raid you over to Lee Elric. Do please watch a few minutes at least of the rated show, and encourage his viewers to come watch our show too. Hopefully, what we're going to do. Oh, I see what I did. It said invalid link. I see what happened. Boom, confirm raid. So I'm sending you guys over to the Lee Elric show, and it'll be great. So yeah, share, like, share, subscribe. We love you. We will see you tomorrow.